Now we got the sign.
Yay.
So welcome to this session, 4A. We've got two papers in this session, Sara Shadmi-Wortman and Deborah Altus. We're going to take both the papers in turn, and then we're going to collect questions and a collective discussion after both papers. Okay, so I'm going to, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sara. We just need to check, we've got to check everyone's in the virtual world and in the real world. Are the slides being shared? Because they look like they're just in this room. Being shared, okay. Okay, we just want a moment. So, well, I can add a little bit more introduction whilst we're waiting to say that Sara is an expert in community work, founder and CEO of the Varda Institute of Community Building, and that draws on her long experience within the kibbutzim movement. And I think we're ready to go. Okay, so and we're okay in the virtual world? Great, okay. I'm going to hand over to Sara then, who's going to take our first paper. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm moving, are you moving that? The slides, I mean. Okay, hi everyone. I hope you still will stay awake until the end of our session. By the way, I'm going to tell something really optimistic, so maybe it will give us strength to the continuing of the day. So I want to start and say what I'm doing these days, because everything that I'll tell after that has to be in the perspective of what I'm trying to do now. So now, a year and a half ago, I established, so I will tell you where to go. Go. So in the last and a half year, I established an international institute that's called the Varda Center, which is a feminine name. It's a very feminist organization that wants to bring, and you did it? Great. So, no, wait, go back. So the vision, just look at the vision, and then when I'll tell the story of what I want to talk about today, you'll see if it works. So the vision is a world in which every person matters, feels seen and heard, and belongs to a community that promote a common good and create positive change. Next. And the mission is to create a stronger, vibrant, more connected society by inspire community building within diverse organizations and groups so that individuals feel sense of belonging, thrive, and act together to address shared challenges and better their surroundings. And we're doing it, how we do it in two ways. We have staff in America in the development world, and we are doing two kinds of things. First, we collaborate with an umbrella organization all over the world, building sustainable infrastructure that unites people into groups who works together effective to address shared challenges that they have in their surrounding. And we inspire community building and organization themselves, groups and communities, cities, villages all over the world by leading them through a structured process, helping them design for belonging and transformation into community builders. And we did it all over in municipalities, alumni communities, educational institutes, NGOs, community centers, religious institute, and villages in the third world.
Wow.
And the case today, I have to start to dance, I think, is that today I want to show the case, the whole this perspective that we call it culture of belonging, through a case study about how we work with young people all over the world and see them as a great force to regenerate the surroundings around them. Either it's in rural or in urban communities. So the two heroes we have here are one, the community, and the second one are young adults. So I want to talk about each one of them and then do the combination in between them, because we will have three questions here, okay? Go. Why young adults, right? What special role have young adults in the communities? Number two, why young adults for the community? So Why them? What specific role they have that nobody else has in the communities? And number three, why community for young people? So I want to start from the first hero, which is the young adult. And I want to say, I'm not losing this? Okay. Okay. So go. So I want to start with why young adult. Go. No, you can go. Yeah, all of that. Okay. So first of all, it's really interesting to see how the more adult generation looks about the young generation. We have like an ambivalent relationship to them, right? I'm talking as the mother already. So from one hand, thank you. From one side, they are like the future. We have big hopes about them. On the other hand, we are really disappointed when they are not doing exactly what we want. So we have like two contradictable expectations. We want them to bring new things. And on the other hand, we want them to continue ourselves. So, and many times in cities, when they want to see us show creativity and future, they show how many young people are coming to them or how attractive they are for young people. Okay. And when you look, you can go, all these circles. And when we look at young adults, and probably we talk about 20 to 40, it's funny because every 5 years I'm enlarging the numbers. So it was 20 to 30, then it was 20 to 35, and now, not because I'm becoming old, it's because I think it's because it's lengthening. What does it mean to be young and the moratorium stage? So what we see from our research, the young adult, in many cases, wants what everybody wants. Although it's more extreme a little bit, they search for belonging, they want solidarity, they feel that they need dignity in relation to them, they want to be successful, they really bother from their growth, and they're searching for opportunity to prove themselves. Go. On the other hand, what is really interesting to find out, and by the way, we have researchers now that shows that the internet and the technology even makes all of this much more extreme, and I'll give just one example. You can go with the pictures, yeah, go, thanks. Let's just take the feeling of loneliness. What we know from now already from research that we have in the last 15 years, that the illusion of having 10,000 friends on Facebook, or to have so many connections in all the other, the Instagram or whatever, and the fact that you say something and everybody reacts to you, creates an illusion that you really have 10,000 friends. But in the real moments, the gap that at the end, when you need something, nobody comes because nobody knocks on the door. So this gap between the illusion that I have 10,000 friends and the reality creates a huge feeling of despair and how does it call? Depression, and depression. And we talked about numbers of suicide and more people that are depressed comparing to the generation before. And what's really interesting, I see it with my students and with the young people, when I ask them if they have an experience of community, whenever I teach them, many of them don't even have it in their short history. They don't even know how to imagine it, although emotionally they are seeking for that. So they don't have even something in their memory. So what it brings to huge feeling of being scared of that. So I'm always describing this moment, and I want you to remember that one of the things that's frightening them the most is to come to an event, stand here, just for these 5 minutes until somebody will come and feeling that sense that they can die from that. And for not feeling that, they will be ready to give up the event. So everything that is going, so there will be less than any generation before taking the risk for that. And for not feeling these painful moments, they will be ready to give up the opportunity at all. So it means everything about why and how you should work with these people, with these young people. Go. So our theory of change say and it's a joke that everybody says to me, when I'm going all over the world and I ask people, okay, tell me what's your problem? Community building will be the solution. Doesn't matter even what's the problem. So in this case, I would say the same. So our theory of change will be that the gap between the needs and their feeling that they want to be better and they want to make a change and they want to be seen as everybody else, and the feeling that they have, the alienation, the loneliness, I think, and that's what we try to do all over, is to get this bridge between the needs through community building, through creating communities. Go. And we assume, and I'll show you that in a minute, how community for young adults can be a home. We'll define in a moment, what does it mean to feel home? It could be a safe environment to be who you are. And it's a great opportunity, maybe the best one, to bring a meaning to the world. Okay, go. But I want to say something about that. Most of the young people in the world won't live in intentional communities, but all of them need framework of belonging. So the question is how, and intentional communities are really important to create the context, to create the option, the spiritual, but even as a model to say, I want it or not, but having it is very important. But we shouldn't assume that most of them will come. And more than that, I will say, I think we'll have responsibility to show much more options if this is the only option. And we created like a continuum of the principles I'll show you in a minute of different levels of these frameworks of belonging that can create different average of living in different kinds of models of community. It doesn't have to be until what does it mean to be intentional community. Okay. So what I want to do now as a professional, you know, that I want to talk a little bit about the approach I'm bringing you, that we called it culture of belonging and through community building. And you know, as a professional, I'm sure of all of you, one of the main things that I needed to do when I started the work 20 years ago is to define what it is and what it is not. Not to say this is the Bible, just to say that's a word, that's my tools in order to know when it's relevant and when it's not. So we won't do today how you do it. We'll do it and do it tomorrow's session, how you do it actually. And I have even a gimmick. I have the 10 commandments, how you do community building. Maybe I'll show you if we'll get to that today. But I want to start from the definition. Not to say that it's not what it's not in, for people to know, for me to know when is relevant to do what. So intentional community, or communities in all, is a group of people that shaping together individual and shared values and practices of life, both internally and with their surrounding, feeling sense of belonging and responsibility for the members and for the group and for the general common good of the whole, based on the 3 dimensions of support, mission, and study. Go. Oh, no, go back. Now I want to ask you a question. I want each of you thinking about a group that was really meaningful for you. Leave the word community ahead. Just think about a group that was really meaningful for you. And if I would ask you why it was so meaningful, what did you felt that made it so meaningful for you? Can you say a word about that? Yes. Yeah, so what happened there? What did you feel that it was meaningful for you? Meaningful? No, but what made it meaningful?
Sarah, just to say that we can't do interaction very easily because it excludes the virtual world.
Okay. So then we should exclude everybody. Okay, that's interesting.
In the discussion and do that when we have a roving mic.
I'll ask you and then answer myself. So I want to give you the 5 measurements that we developed for what does it mean to feel that this place is your community. So it's 5 measurements. Go. Thank you. So it's I matter, I'm committed, I belong, I trust, I'm proud. So, and we don't have time, so I can leave it after that. Go. I have an explanation to each one of this, and tomorrow in the workshop we'll actually feel it and understand more what it means. But I'll just give you to feel it. What does it mean to feel meaningful? It means that the things that I bring considered a huge assets for this community. Being meaningful, it means that the community, the whole community stood up and say, wow, Shlomo, we are so happy you are with us. Without you, we aren't the same. That's feeling meaningful. And when you feel this, you feel very committed. Go. And the most important thing for the community is that what we call a sense of community, kilatiyut, we'll call it. I defined it as the ability of members of the group to share a sense of belonging and responsibility for each other and for the existence of the group, and acting together to advance the common good and create a sense of pride and creativity. And then in a minute, if we'll have time, I'll show you how to do it. Okay, go. I have to run. These are the measurements. I gave you the measurements of feeling subjectively. Okay, thank you. I won't have to tell you go, go, go. Okay, thanks. So this is the behavior. Now, change in the world won't come from what I feel. Change comes from what I'm doing. So you'll see when the sense of community is aroused and the place becomes a home, people will do these. More attention, they'll come, more collaboration, more initiatives, and increased giving of time, of money, of efforts, of everything. Now the question, if I'm doing it right. Yeah, so what makes the community so unique? Because it's the only group in the world, in the human world, that the mission and the relationship on the same time, the mean and the purpose. It's also the way and also the purpose. And community creates for itself three kinds of sphere of life. A lot of frameworks that talks about who we are, is your uniqueness, what is our mission in the world, and what are the relationship between us, who we are, what is important. And the third one is what we want to create for ourselves and for the world. So what I want to do now, we don't have time for that because I prepared to you, and we won't have time, right? How much time I have? Okay, one case, I brought two. I brought you two cases, but we'll talk only on one. I'll tell you what are they. First case is a case we did in Israel. I'll talk about that with the young, because the big question is how you teach them, how you give young people the experience that they had what we call moment of truth. They experienced something they want to continue in their life. And maybe we even help them to create this framework for their lifetime. So we did working all over the world. I brought two examples, one from Israel and the second one from Africa, from Burundi in Africa. So we don't have time for both of them, so I'll show you at least the first case study. So this is the protest in Israel in 2011. Young people went out to the streets and demonstrated for and against the cost of living in Israel, which is very high, but it was much more than that. It was like a rebellion against the establishment. And my students, I was amazed that my students were all over, and I'm sure I'm not the only now. And after the protests, and it's affected the government, and after the protest stopped, I got a phone call for who is going to be after a Knesset member, but he is a student of mine. He called me and said, Sara, I want to do it. I don't want to just do the protest. I really want to do the change. So I want to go there. I want to go to Lod. Lod is like, it's in the center of the country, but it's like the backyard. Everything you can think about, which is bad, you'll find them. Like the places nobody wants to go there. All the most neglected population, you'll find them. The Arabs, but not just the Arabs, the most wicked part of the Arabs, and Jews from all the newcomers that came in Israel and all this. So the poorest population, you'll find it in Lod, and it's the middle of the country. It's like in the middle of the way between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And he said, I want to go there. I want to live there. And I want to bring with me young people. You have to come with me and see it and tell me how we should do that. So we came in 5 o'clock in the morning. We went to make a tour there. And he said, I'll bring them. I know how to bring them. We'll offer them maybe scholarship. We'll bring them. We'll offer them. He didn't have really anything in his hand, but he was sure that he will offer money. I think people will come. And I told him what I said in another project we did in Jerusalem. Living living in a house, having a house, a home, buying a house, and having a profession is necessary but not enough. They will come for that, but they will live for that. And that's what happened in Jerusalem. The only thing that we actually leave them here, make them stay, will be building them a framework of community. Let's bring groups of people, help them to create these intentional community as part of their staying there, for being part of a scholarship they'll get, and they would not even know what they're doing, but they will give them this experience. And they did, and that was the target population. And they published it, and they thought hundreds will come. They said, we want 30, 24 arrived. And they said, okay, they wanted to do selection, no selection, because it wasn't even enough people for that. And that's what I told you before. So, and then we brought them, and we had 3 ideas. Number 1 is to create young scene in the town, which failed. Number 2 was to take neighborhoods, it was successful in Jerusalem, but in Lod it was impossible. Number 2 is to situate them in groups in one neighborhood, close to each other, and create the neighborhood as a framework to create this experience. And number 3, to create what we call a BCG, a bonding community group. So, as I told you, 24 started. And what we did with them, again, we don't have time to talk about it, but we used the whole principles of community. We told them, in order to do that, you have to close 1 weekend every 3 weeks. You have to participate in a meeting of the group every week. And we build all these frameworks in order that they will start to feel and to experience what does it mean to live in an intentional community without even choosing that, okay? So at the beginning, the idea was that slowly it becomes theirs. And then they could, for example, to do the circle in the morning, how do you feel today and what do you feel? When you want to do a big event in the city, in Lod, they wanted to do the Purim festival, why you do it that way? So all these kinds of discussion about who we are. And you want to go to the university in Jerusalem because you're a student, maybe you'll create like a carpool, like basic things of how to actually try to relate to each other. For example, to teach them to say that if I'm sick, it's our problem. Even these basic things. Why should I tell you that I'm sick? Why should it bother you at all? Because we are living in a community without saying it even, okay? So that's why the idea. And what I'm really proud to say that 10 years later now, 350 young people are living in Lod.
Wow.
And I want to show you that. 4 years after they arrived in 2016, first group of the children of the people who got married and stayed there. And because they had already 20 babies, they had to build the first kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And the idea was, wow, they build the kindergarten, but it will be open for other people in Lod. And you can assume that the preschool that they built was so different in Lod. And then you have this 350 people who are actually living there. And today, you have 10 people on one place in Lod to come to that program. And now they are started to build a school. And I just wanted to tell you the story of one woman, Nava, who came as a student, then married Yochai, and then they came to live in one of the buildings. That's what they found in the shelter. And they said, wow, we should build like we called it in Israel, a committee of the building. And then they created this. They rearranged it to be like a meeting gathering of the building, which is very neglected, had their first baby, and together they created the first early. I don't know if, no way, 1 minute. Okay, so I won't tell the story about that. I'll just say that the big test crisis they had to go through is last year we had riots in Lod between Arabs and Jews. Everybody felt attacked. And the group of these young people are, I didn't tell you that, but I want to show you that. that they are involved from all the 4 big groups that we call it tribes in Israel, the Haredi, that they are the Arabs, that are groups that usually are not connected at all. The 350 people that I'm telling you about in Lod are not just people who came from outside, it's also people who live in Lod. Indigenous people who live there and people who came from outside. And together what happened, they were like an island. Like when an Arab, one of the couple as Arab was in their home, frightening because Jews were outside throwing stones and they were afraid to come. The Jews that were living upstairs went down and actually protect them on their body. And we had the opposite stories the same. In one of the other neighborhoods, a Jewish couple that were Orthodox, that were really attacked by the Arabs, were afraid to go out of the room. And again, the Arabs stood there and it wasn't for granted to take it. So they stood in a very difficult situation. And if I want to say something about the term moment of truth, for me, the word, if do local and think global, right? Mm-hmm. For me, the explanation for this sentence is to say, I wish all the world will look like Lod in the sense of the relationship. So if somebody will ask me, how do you want the world, and let's start from Israel, look like? I would say exactly what's happening in the relationship between these people. And I want to just finish. Yeah. So I'll just say that it's now a national program. It's in 53 communities, in 50 towns, in the most disadvantaged towns. And I'm going backward. Wait. I just prepared a small 60% stayed all over and 40% went with the idea to other. And I won't show you about Burundi, about Africa. And these are the 10 commandments for tomorrow. But I just wanted to give you one thing for inspiration that I love a lot. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think community is a genius idea how to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you very much. Do you want to make space now for the next speaker? No, I'm just thinking because you've been dancing like that, and then we'll bring you back for joint discussion. That's right. There aren't any slides for the next session. Do you want to put a blank slide up or something? Yeah. So our next speaker is Deborah Altus. And Deborah is Professor of Family and Human Services at Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas, USA. And you're going to introduce your case study yourself, I imagine. Yeah.
All right. Do I need to turn this on or is it already on? Is it working?
Oh, it is. Okay, yes, it is.
Good. Now. All right. Yes. My paper is Developmental Communalism in the Therapeutic Community Movement, Synanon and the Oxford House Model. And I got interested in this in two kind of different ways. I've been studying communal groups for years and always knew about Synanon. And then in my job as a professor, my department runs a program to train students to become addiction counselors. And I'm actually a licensed clinical addiction counselor. And one of my students lived in an Oxford house and had this sort of missionary zeal about Oxford houses. And so I became very interested in them. And then I discovered that Oxford houses were really a descendant of the Synanon community. So that's what my paper today is about. I will explain what Oxford houses are. Yeah. Therapeutic communities are not a modern phenomenon. As De Leon has noted, the idea of therapeutic community recurs throughout history, implemented in different incarnations. Communities that teach, heal, and support appear in religious sects and utopian communes, as well as in spiritual, temperance, and mental health reform movements. The term therapeutic community came into use in Britain in the 1940s to describe a new approach to working with psychiatric patients that was more democratic and that actively involved patients in their own treatment and in the day-to-day operations of the residential setting. These communities, initially formed within psychiatric hospitals, were based on the notion that the psychological problems were largely a function of the social environment and therefore could be treated effectively by providing a healthier social network. The use of the term therapeutic community appears to have developed independently in the United States, referring initially to a democratic, mutual aid, community-focused, recovery-oriented approach to drug rehabilitation that was pioneered by Charles Diedrich in the late 1950s. This approach, which became known as Synanon, has spawned hundreds of similar drug rehabilitation programs in the United States and abroad as part of the therapeutic communities movement. I'll examine this movement, focusing on its beginnings in Synanon and its continuation through one of its particularly prolific descendants, the Oxford House model. When Charles Diedrich began his approach to working with drug addicts, few options other than confinement in psychiatric hospitals or incarceration in jails or prisons existed. Diedrich, an alcoholic, joined Alcoholics Anonymous in Southern California in 1956 after his second marriage fell apart. He devoted himself to the program over the next 2 years and turned his life around. Alcoholics Anonymous, founded in the United States in 1935, is an abstinence model based, among other things, on mutual aid, honesty, accountability, and surrendering to a higher power. AA was inspired by the Oxford Group, an early 20th century Christian fellowship. AA obtained its ideas of self-examination, acknowledgement of character defects, restitution for harm done, and working with others directly from the Oxford Group. Along with the act as if, or informally, the fake it until you make it philosophy.
We're getting
Getting something in 2008, then we picked it up in 2009, did the cleanup in 2010, and so on. And then we are designing some tools.
Apologies, Deborah.
That's okay.
Okay, so I think it's gone now. So I think it sounds like it's okay.
We made a so-called Leaders Academy, which was our tool to like our training.
Maybe it's one of the Zoom participants.
All around the world, and
Should I go ahead?
leaders reach out to adapt to their.
Okay, that's fine. Diedrich expanded on AA's focus on honesty and self-examination through impromptu weekly discussion groups with AA friends, where he began using confrontational methods as a type of group therapy to expose hypocrisy and promote personal growth. People were drawn to his unorthodox methods, and his apartment became a clubhouse of sorts. Drug addicts joined the group, and people moved into adjacent apartments. Diedrich rented a storefront building as a larger clubhouse space to accommodate newcomers. By August of 1958, they broke away from AA, partly because AA objected to the inclusion of drug addicts, but also because Diedrich felt he was creating something new and different. In his words, quote, "We have a live-in situation with family characteristics. We emphasize self-reliance rather than dependence on a higher being." Diedrich incorporated the clubhouse, and it became known as Synanon. The origins of the name are somewhat unclear, with some accounts that it came out of a member's struggle to pronounce the words seminar and symposium, while others have suggested that it was an amalgamation of the words sin and anonymous. While aspects of the AA approach, with its focus on honesty, responsibility, accountability, mutual aid, and act as if, continued in Synanon, it diverged in a variety of ways. For one, it developed a communal form of existence. For another, it developed what Synanon scholar Rod Jansen called a hard-hitting encounter group format that eventually became known as the game. Diedrich felt that drug addicts, whom Synanon called dope fiends in its forthright approach, could not afford to hide anything if they expected to stay clean. Throughout much of the first 10 years, Synanon was focused on drug rehabilitation. It grew rapidly during this period, with people attracted to Diedrich's charismatic leadership and his freewheeling practices. According to one writer, the media had a decade-long enchantment with Synanon, with stories appearing in widely circulated mainstream sources such as the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, Life magazine, and Time magazine. A movie was even made on Synanon in 1965, and stars came to visit and play the game. Sociology professor Louis Jablonski described Diedrich's work as miraculous in his 1965 book on Synanon, The Tunnel Back, adding that with the help of this core group of remarkable people, he has produced a new social constellation of hope, which has the potential of benefiting many more people caught up in the morass of crime, addiction, and other problems. Jablonski concluded that Synanon works, and the existence of hundreds of clean ex-addicts and criminals should be clear evidence of success to any logical, unbiased person. In the mid-1960s, Synanon opened game clubs around the country so that squares, or non-addicts, could participate. By the end of the 60s, membership in Synanon grew to over 1,000, and the organization was receiving over $2 million a year in donations, with multiple properties throughout California, along with locations in Nevada, Michigan, New York, and Puerto Rico, and a variety of enterprises, including gas stations and an advertising business. About the same time, Synanon started expecting permanent residents rather than promoting a rehab program that led to graduation. Diedrich said that this was because graduates had difficulty finding jobs and staying sober. He said, "I know damn well if they go out of Synanon, they are dead." With this change, Synanon moved into a new phase, that of utopian community, with Diedrich claiming, "If we can redirect the lives of dope fiends, we can do anything." In his book on Synanon, Jansen noted that it was fortuitous that Diedrich was expanding his vision for Synanon at the same time that there was a growing interest throughout society in new forms of living and being. Indeed, hundreds of squares and their families flocked to the community. In 1974, Synanon became incorporated as a church, allowing the organization to retain tax-exempt status in the wake of concerns about its status as a drug rehab. The community continued to grow, and by the mid-70s, assets had increased to $22 million, with over 5,000 acres of property in multiple locations. Jansen suggests that this was not only a period focused on Diedrich's utopian vision, but also on increasing bureaucratic leadership. Diedrich remained at the top of the organization, forming a government that Jansen describes as an autocratic pyramidal structure, including a board of directors, a president, department heads, managers, and a leadership cabinet at each facility. Along with the increase in bureaucracy, the 70s saw increasing forms of behavioral control. Members were required to give up smoking, give up sugar, shave their heads, get vasectomies and abortions, and even get divorced and change their partners. Corporal punishment began to be used with the children, along with military-style discipline in the school. They formed a paramilitary group, the Imperial Marines, and they stockpiled weapons. Jansen writes that Diedrich acted in increasingly irrational ways after the death of his wife in 1977, adding that virtually all former members noted significant problems related to Diedrich's later diagnosed bipolar disorder. In a 1977 article, Time magazine wrote that a once respected drug program turned into a kooky cult. Diedrich even reversed his position on alcohol in 1978, and Jansen notes that former residents insisted that Diedrich was drunk much of the time, especially during the 1980s. Although violence was originally eschewed by the community, there were violent attacks on former members, culminating in an attempted murder scheme in 1978, where a lawyer for former members, Paul Morantz, was attacked by a rattlesnake put in his mailbox. a scheme for which Diederich was fined and sentenced to 5 years probation. Marantz has called this event Synanon's Pearl Harbor. Marantz became a consultant to the US Department of Justice in a tax case against Synanon, in which the organization's tax-exempt status was revoked and the community had to pay $17 million in back taxes. The court ruled that Synanon had engaged in a policy of terror and violence and a practice of diverting corporate resources for the enrichment of individuals. Synanon declared bankruptcy and formally dissolved in 1991, and Diederich died 6 years later at the age of 83. While Jansen writes that many injustices were committed at Synanon and that Diederich not only helped thousands, but also wreaked havoc on the lives of thousands of others, sometimes the same people, he also stresses that Synanon was not simply a paranoid cult composed of always compliant followers of a power-hungry founder. In fact, Jansen describes Synanon as, quote, one of the most successful and most innovative communal societies in the United States. He notes that it began as a community with a creative and effective approach to drug addiction that provided the model for thousands of drug treatment centers throughout the world. Indeed, the methods developed at Synanon became the impetus for the therapeutic community's approach to drug rehab, initially employing many former Synanon members and following basic Synanon practices. Diederich even described therapeutic communities as branches of Synanon. These organizations tended to be democratically run residences staffed by peers in recovery with a focus on overall lifestyle change, not simply abstinence from drug use, using mutual aid to promote right living, and many times employing tough love Synanon-like methods similar to the game. Former members went on to establish or otherwise serve as staff in a variety of Synanon-like rehab programs in communities and in prisons around the country over the next couple of decades. Programs starting in the 1960s included Daytop Village and Phoenix House in New York City, Senacor in Colorado State Penitentiary, CEDU in California, with some saying CEDU stood for Charles E. Diederich University, Escalapion in a maximum security prison in Illinois, Matrix House in the United States Narcotic Farm in Kentucky, and Walden House in San Francisco. The 1970s saw the founding of Delancey Street in San Francisco, with Amity starting in Arizona in the 1980s, just to name a few. These therapeutic communities have a checkered history, with some prospering to the present day, while others succumbing to problems reminiscent of Synanon. Senacor, for example, started by an inmate who had participated in a Synanon program in prison, has been the subject of several lawsuits, suggesting that tens of thousands of participants have been forced to work without pay, performing hard labor under dangerous conditions under the guise of work therapy. CEDU was said to employ sleep deprivation, humiliation, exposure to large variations in temperature, and other coercive practices. The leader of Matrix House was described by one staff member as untruthful, manipulative, and conniving, and was eventually convicted on charges of sexual abuse and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Walden House was described as a scandal-ridden drug rehab with repeated allegations of mind games, graft, corruption, and welfare fraud. A former Walden House staff member claimed that the unwritten policy of Walden House is to ridicule, ostracize, and force out members not willing to endorse or accept the Synanon-based philosophy. On the flip side, though, is the remarkably successful Oxford House model. While Oxford House was not founded by a former Synanon member, it began in 1975, around the same time that a variety of Synanon-inspired therapeutic communities were opening around the United States, and it was likely influenced by the democratic spirit within drug rehab programs that was pioneered by Synanon. That is, that people in recovery themselves could engage in mutual aid to create a voluntary, peer-run living environment focused on whole person change. The first Oxford House was started in 1975 by Paul Malloy, a Washington, D.C. attorney and an alcoholic who was attending AA meetings and living in a halfway house with other alcoholics and addicts. After learning that the funding for his house would end, he and the other residents took over the lease with financial assistance from a fellow AA member. Malloy and his fellow residents developed some basic rules, including abstinence from drugs and alcohol, democratic operations, equal sharing of rent and operating costs, sharing of the household chores, and mutual respect. The house thrived with more applicants than space, and they created a surplus that allowed them to start a second house within 6 months. This cycle of growth has continued to the present day, and currently there are 3,231 resident-run, self-supporting Oxford houses in 47 states across the United States with 26,233 beds. In addition, the model has spread to Canada, the UK, Australia, and Ghana. As Oxford houses expanded, the houses within an area formed chapters. Chapters hold monthly meetings and social events, provide support for member houses, and offer educational workshops about addiction and recovery. Chapters have banded together to form state associations, also for the purpose of education, socialization, and support for member houses. Chapters and state associations provide accountability, helping to ensure that houses remain drug and alcohol-free and follow the basic rules. A national association, Oxford House Incorporated, was formed to provide support to houses and spread the model throughout, issuing chapters. To form a house and obtain a chapter, a group of 6 or more people must agree to form a house that is democratically self-run, financially self-supported, and to expel any resident who uses alcohol or illicit drugs. According to the organization, the participatory democracy of Oxford houses minimizes the we versus them attitude that can detract from a focus on recovery and development of self-reliance and self-respect. As William White, one of the foremost experts on addictions treatment in the United States, has said about this model, Oxford houses change people's lives by changing the context in which they live, the physical, social, and emotional environment. Their healing power comes not from professional experts, but from participation in a community of shared experiences and hope. This power is rooted in a shared commitment to recovery within a democratic community where relationships are peer-based rather than professionally directed, reciprocal rather than fiduciary, and potentially enduring rather than transient. The name Oxford House comes from the Oxford Group, the previously mentioned 20th century Christian organization that influenced the founders of AA and indirectly Charles Diedrich through a focus on confession, conviction, and continuance, that the changed person should help others to change. Through these common roots, Oxford houses have similarities to Synanon in its first decade, with a focus on abstinence, mutual aid, and family-style peer-run communal living as a way to promote a recovery-centered environment for lifestyle change. There are, though, some key differences that may at least partly account for the vastly different outcomes of the two approaches. While Diedrich's charismatic style and autocratic leadership were a central part of Synanon, Oxford houses have focused on egalitarianism as a core principle, with each individual having an equal vote in house operations. House officer positions are unpaid and are limited to 6 months, preventing any one person from gaining too much power. As officer positions have limited terms, all residents eventually serve in an officer position, which the organization views as an important part of instilling responsibility and self-esteem. While Synanon accumulated property and developed businesses in which members worked, Oxford houses have purposefully stayed away from owning property and accumulating wealth. Oxford houses are all rented from private individuals, not owned, and owners of the houses may not live in them to prevent power imbalances. The main purpose of the centralized Oxford House organization is to provide a startup and legal assistance to member houses, and houses are autonomous except in matters affecting other houses or Oxford House Incorporated as a whole. Oxford House Incorporated has a number of paid positions for Oxford House alumni to serve as outreach workers. But unlike Synanon, residents do not work for the organization. Rather, they find their own sources of income by working in outside jobs. Additionally, while Synanon hasn't had an income-sharing financial structure, Oxford House members do not pool their incomes or turn over their assets to the corporation. Their sole financial responsibility is to pay their fair share of the rent and operating expenses. While member houses are asked to contribute to the state Oxford House organization, contributions are optional, not compulsory. In a recent interview, Oxford House scholar Leonard Jason noted that keeping the request voluntary is key. He states that if it were a rule, people would resent it. By keeping it voluntary, residents feel like they are doing something important when they contribute. Unlike Synanon, from its second decade forward, when permanent residency began to be an expectation, there is no expected length of stay in an Oxford House. Members may stay as long as they wish, although the most recent annual report indicated that the average length of stay is about 9.5 months. Unlike Synanon, which developed a broad utopian vision beyond drug rehab, the focus of Oxford House has solely remained on providing democratic, self-run homes for recovery from addiction. And while Synanon eventually allowed alcohol, Oxford houses require abstinence, with any illicit drug or alcohol use leading to immediate expulsion. Residents are not required to attend AA meetings, but according to the organization's website, nearly all members of Oxford House utilize AA or NA programs in order to obtain and keep a comfortable sobriety. While Synanon's social mission waned over the years, Oxford House has retained a singular focus on creating a culture of recovery. Leonard Jason describes the spirit of their annual conventions as evangelical and notes that the excitement for recovery is remarkable. He adds that when you've been to the bottom, you want to spread the path to recovery to others. When someone saves your life, you become a missionary. While Synanon had a top-down pyramidal structure of government that became increasingly bureaucratic, Oxford houses are more bottom-up in organization. According to Jason, this keeps things from becoming bureaucratic and rigid, allowing for flexibility and change as new information is learned. For example, their experience with co-ed houses didn't go well, and now they only have single-sex houses. Medication for addictions treatment was not originally allowed, but as the organization has learned about its benefits, houses now permit residents to receive medication-assisted therapy for addictions treatment. While Synanon was privately funded, Oxford houses have used small amounts of government assistance to help with startup costs through a revolving loan fund established by the federal government as part of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988. Houses can borrow up to $4,000 from this loan fund when establishing a house. Loan payments have also been used by Oxford House Incorporated for hiring outreach workers. According to Jason, whose research team has been studying Oxford houses for over 3 decades, recruiters were responsible for locating homes in relatively low crime areas, securing the lease for the houses, and making sure each house was furnished. In addition, recruiters set up utilities for the houses and often stay at the house for the first few months to ensure all residents know the rules and enforce the agreed upon policies. However, Oxford House outreach workers are not mental health professionals. Rather, they are alumni, former residents in recovery who have been hired solely as recruiters. Oxford houses, with their strongly democratic, singular-focused grassroots rent network, avoidance of property ownership and accumulation of wealth, creative use of small federal loans to seed houses, and a membership filled with missionary zeal for recovery, appears set for a continued success. In contrast, Synanon clearly suffered from having an autocratic leader with increasing mental health problems, who appeared more motivated by accumulating power and wealth than promoting the original social mission. But while it would be easy to paint Synanon in black and white terms of success or failure, dismissing a 33-year-long utopian experiment that was home to more than 25,000 members in simplistic terms is unwise at best. As Jansen has written, Synanon was an adventurous attempt to change everything, to experiment fundamentally with new ways of living. Synanon also provided a social vaccine for the rest of American society, keeping criminals off the street and addicts out of soup kitchens. It was a radical attempt to design an integrated society in which hardcore addicts from New York City worked alongside Harvard-educated PhDs and corporate executives from San Francisco. In sum, an organization or movement does not necessarily end when its communal period dissolves. As scholar Donald Pitzer has noted in his theory of developmental communalism, intentional communities may evolve into new forms of association or otherwise continue to impact society beyond the end of their communal period. In line with this idea, the Oxford House model ran with Diedrich's pioneering notion that the inmates can run the asylum. Today's 3,000 plus Oxford houses, which have served over 680,000 individuals with data showing high rates of continued sobriety, suggest that they have done just that. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that wasn't too much of a gallop at the end. That's great. We've got precisely half an hour to collect together the two papers. Sarah, do you want to come back up? And your microphone is still on, I think. Yes, hang on to it. We're going to gather some questions in the room and on the Zoom. We'll probably begin in the room. Are there questions coming through in the Zoom? Okay, I'll wait for that. We can have questions for either of the speaker, both speakers, if you can make connections. And let's just try and share out the questioning as well. I'll start with Cheryl, yes. Yes, you do. Should I use this one? Yeah, okay. I'll keep moving around.
So my question's for Deborah. And you had mentioned that the average length of time that people stay in the Oxford houses is about 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any data that you've seen that shows whether or what the rate of return to the community is? Because I assume they leave after 9 months because they think they've got their recovery under control. Is there?
You know, I don't have numbers on that, but I know that Leonard Jason, he studies that and has been doing it for 30 years. Oxford House is very open to being studied by researchers, and they've let Leonard Jason and his research team in, and they have collected just scads of data on the community. And I bet they could answer that question for you. I do know that they found that they studied Oxford House residents versus sort of similar people who didn't go into that kind of a community, and the rates of recovery were startlingly higher, and continued sobriety of those who went through Oxford houses.
That's great. Was your question just for? Should we take one virtually? Don't have any. Well, in which case I'll take this question here because I imagine it might be for Sara. Would you like to use this?
Yeah. First of all, it was really, really wonderful to hear what you're doing in Israel. I was wondering if this project is only for Jewish people, or is there any attempt to do it with the Arab society too?
What I remember the first out, of course, it's Varda Center. The institute is the idea is to bring it. The idea is to bring it all over the world. And I remember when 8 years ago, it was the first time I went to Nepal. I was invited to work in Nepal in villages that they had nothing to eat, and they had to change the whole way of living. And most of the organization that works in the Southwest is working either on human capital, training people for doing things, or bringing physical capital. None of the organization is working, and hundreds of organizations is working on what we call social capital, which is the basic capital for sense of belonging. And when I started to work in Nepal in 2 areas, I remember my colleagues in Israel said, how come you go there? What do you know about that? And I said to myself, and then now 10 years later, I'm much more sure about that person is a person all over the world, and community is community all over the world. So the principles of culture of belonging are the same, the measurements are the same all over the world. And but the way to do that could be on the opposite in different communities. So I remember when I went, for example, one of the basic ideas is we never ask people about what they need. We always ask people what they can give, because nobody likes to be in the public sphere out of what they need, out of their weakness. But everybody wants to be there. So I remember I went there in the villages in the Himalaya, in the Ranichap, and I was asking the woman there in the village, what are you proud of what you have here? And she answered beautiful answers about who she is and what. So definitely, I saw how much joy and happiness and meaningful it brings to all over. Doesn't matter if it's Burundi with people who live there, with the tribes, or it's with Jews in San Francisco, or with the Christian and Buddhist in whatever. For example, just the notion of community building as a process for multi-dimensional, multi-generation relationship, continuing of culture. Christians and Buddhists I did like a workshop in San Francisco for all these leaders of religious institute. They all have the same dilemmas. So because of that, it's the same 10 commandments are the same all over. And you know what the secret is? You have to do so little in order to gain so much when you bring it to people.
Great, that's great. What questions? Are there questions on Zoom? Nothing there? No? Jan, do you want to have a question? Yeah. It's on.
Oh, I'm on. Hello? Yeah, I'm on. I wanted to know if there's any parallels between Synanon and the Oxford House movement and the Catholic workers, because it kind of reminded me a lot of the Catholic worker movement.
Interesting question. Well, I mean, certainly, it's the small group houses, all with, kind of a missionary zeal to do good in the world. I don't know. I'd have to give that some more thought, I think, Jan. Did you see some particular parallels? Sorry, you need the microphone, don't you?
Hello, I'm back. No, it's just that I've not really followed Synanon. I've heard the name, but I didn't know much about it. The same with Oxford House. It just reminded me of reading about the Catholic worker.
Yeah, I would say the Oxford houses maybe are more similar to Catholic worker houses, not so much Synanon. Synanon was really, it was Charles Diedrich and this charismatic force and this really hard-hitting encounter group, the game that they played, and all these really difficult behavioral rules they had to follow. That to me doesn't seem like Catholic worker, but the Oxford houses seem a little bit more in line with what Catholic worker houses are like.
Yeah, the thought came up in the course of your talk rather than at the beginning.
That's great. It's nice to make these connections and things. Other questions or thoughts or observations?
Everybody's tired.
Oh, dear. Are you
It's
tired?
late.
Are you tired?
It was very clear what we talked about.
They
No
were two
question.
very powerful papers, and there were little points of relation, but they also stood alone very much themselves. And you can't force synergies where they are, but I think certainly. Well, if are there no questions in Zoom? No. Okay. Well, I don't think we should. It might be that we have some informal conversations afterwards. So, shall we thank the speakers in the usual way? And thank the long-suffering room tech. Who's been
Yes.
going all day.
Yes.
And Amy Hart, who's been Zoom tech for several sessions today. And thank you, Jan, for stepping in as Zoom chair.
I'm sorry, I don't know if we're too late, but we actually just got a question in on Zoom.
Oh.
I don't know if anyone feels like-
Go for it.
So
Just
go-
under the
Go
wire.
ahead, friends, and unmute yourself.
I just wanted to know whether we could have the talks, and you have them on paper in front of you. Could we get them to read? They were so dense in information.
Could you hear that? Oh,
Was that a request? I think that the session is recorded, so maybe the recording is made available, but not the written paper, I imagine. Is that right? You could always email
The slideshow, I can.
email Deborah Altus yourself and maybe make a special request, but we're not routinely making the papers available. Is that about right? Recordings are going to be up. Recording will be there. Is that okay to the speaker there? Okay, I think we'll take that as a yes. Should we close this session and retire to more comfortable standing seating positions?
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Sounds good.
Thank you.